local elections, update for elected members. I'll hand over to you, Jack.
Well, kia ora koutou, Mayor Baker and councillors. So today we're going to be giving you an update on progress for the process of local elections 2025. Additionally, a reminder about protocols for current elected members. This is an open item so that all candidates have the same information provided to them, and will basically summarise what's going to be presented at the candidate information sessions this weekend and also on Monday. Details about those are on our website. So, first of all, elections team, we contract Elections NZ Limited to run our elections, and Warwick Lamp is our electoral officer. And I am the Deputy Electoral Officer. Cool. And then the other organisations that are involved, Electoral Commission. The Electoral Commission does not currently have a direct role in the local elections, but they are very important in assisting us to getting as many people enrolled as possible, and we're currently working quite closely alongside our counterparts at the Electoral Commission, which is awesome. The Ombudsman does not have a role so much in local elections, as the electoral officer is exempt from Lagoima, and the electoral officer answers to a district court judge upon a petition of inquiry. First of all, candidate safety. We just want to emphasise to all candidates this year that they should take steps for their safety during the campaign. Just be aware of situations, crowded spaces, things like that. This is what the electoral officer is responsible for, so basically conduct of elections. And the chief executive is responsible for promotion of substantial and representative participation in local elections under the Local Government Act. So that's the elections timetable. So we are currently in the first part of that, and tonight at midnight the Māori electoral option closes. So if you know anyone who is on the who is of Māori descent who would like to update their role, which role they're on, please let them know and urge them to do that at vote.nz today. Excellent. So nominations are being called for Mayor, our councillors, and the Greater Wellington Regional Councillors. All candidate names for all issues will be in random order. As I outlined a couple of months ago, there's been a couple of changes since the 2022 local elections. The voting period is now longer. New Zealand Post has longer to deliver the votes. Nominations period is slightly shorter. Māori electoral option is possible this time round, which is great. Hartmana Charitable Trust, no election for that. Regional Council has a Māori constituency. And importantly, telephone dictation voting is now available.
Okay, question, Jeff.
Can you just clarify with regards to the Greater Wellington Regional Council's Māori constituency, does that cover the entirety of the Greater Wellington area, or is it broken down into the constituent regions of that are contiguous with local councils, territorial authorities?
It is one constituency electing one member for the whole region.
Okay.
And that's just based on the Māori electoral population, as we have as well. Excellent. So, Māori ward polls, I don't think I need to go into this too much. You are quite aware of this. Non-binding poll, as you resolved in May, to add a non-binding poll to the voting papers, and the electoral officer has actioned that, and that will be on the voting papers this September and October. Nominations process, 4 weeks from last Friday, closes on the 1st of August at 12 noon, not 12:01, 12 noon. And you can submit your nomination in person downstairs with me or one of the team, or alternatively you can email it to elections@poriruacity.govt.nz. We've received one nomination so far, and we expect them to come in over the next couple of weeks. Nominations process, you've got to state if you're standing in any other elections across Aotearoa, community boards, council, wards, regional council, etc. It's shown at the top of the profile statement, but it's not included in your 150 words. Please be aware that the first page of the nominations paper is open for inspection at our front counter. The nominations paper has been reconfigured since 2022 to make it so that any contact details are on the second page of the nomination paper. However, your name, address, and your nominator's name and address will be on the front of the nomination paper. Excellent. If you wish to nominate for Greater Wellington Regional Council, please go to their office at 100 Cooper Street or email them with their address on the screen. That is a nomination form, which you hopefully have seen. It is available on our website, in our libraries, and at our front counter. And that is the key things you need: evidence of New Zealand citizenship, evidence of deposit, photo, and a profile statement just hiding under Councillor Waddle there. And candidate qualifications: you've got to be a New Zealand citizen, got to be on the roll, and both of your nominators must be in the area you are standing. You yourself don't need to be in the area you are standing in, but if you are registered outside the area, it will show at the top of the candidate profile statement that my main place of residence is outside the X area. You can stand for both mayor and councillor or another council, and you can stand on for the Porirua Māori ward if you're on the general roll, and vice versa. And if you're a council employee, you've got to resign if you're elected. You can't stand for Porirua City Council and Greater Wellington at the same time. Can't be in prison for more than 3 years. Can't have a contract of over $25,000 with the council or your partner, and you cannot stand for more than one ward. And unfortunately, you can't withdraw after closing nominations unless you are medically incapacitated, which is quite a high bar. That's just what I said. Candidate profile statements, so 150 words or less, can be in both English and Te Reo Māori, or English and another language, but if it's English and another language, they will total 150 words. Next up, candidate photos. You've got needs to be last 12 months, head and shoulders. You can smile in your photo. It's not a passport photo.
How was that one, Jack?
That is when I ran for the Tile Community Board in 2013. And then this is an example profile statement, what it will look like in the candidate handbook. Candidate videos. Again, we will be filming candidate videos on the 15th and 16th of August. You'll have 90 seconds to answer 4 or 5 questions. And the questions and the length of the video are going to be confirmed at the time of the invitation. We'll send out a bookings link near the end of the nominations period, and you can book yourself in for a 20-minute slot. And those videos will be taken at Pātaka on that weekend. So the pre-election period begins tomorrow. This is the reminder, and now is the time to update your social medias, your TikToks, your Facebooks, to add an authorization statement, remove any council official photography that you've got as your profile photo, for example, and then switch over your email address to a personal email address or campaign email address. So campaigning can start at any time. There's generally no rules about campaigning. However, you can't use council resources, as we've previously said. That's logo, branding, colours, council social media, buildings, venues, things like that, apart from venues that are publicly bookable at publicly available rates. Voting papers can't be collected from electors by candidates or agents of the candidates. No campaigning or electioneering in council chambers as well, or council premises, or in the same premises as an orange voting bin. Thank you. And so the period for electoral expenses begins tomorrow as well. Excellent. Social media. So council social media will unfollow, unlike all of your pages and profiles. And we are...
I did all that myself.
Well, thank you. And we will not link to any candidates' social media pages, and we will not allow links from any candidates to our social media pages as well. So our social media channels will be monitored and strictly enforced, these rules.
Josh.
Just a very quick question around that. In the event of if there's an emergency at some point in the next couple of months while we are still elected members, what's the protocol there for sharing official comms?
Yeah, I would say that would be...
I was going to ask the same question about Remo. Why are we disconnecting from Remo when I'm the mayor? I found that quite disturbing, because if we have an event, what the hell?
I would say that elected members would be able to share those comms during an emergency.
We're not going to see them, though, because we've had to untag from them. Yeah, but,
Yeah.
but we're not seeing the Remo stuff as it comes up because we're not allowed to watch it anymore, are we? We're not tagged, yeah, okay.
You're allowed to like our pages and things like that. It's just that our pages won't be liking candidates' pages.
Okay.
Okay.
Josh, sorry, yeah.
Excellent. So that's a continued summary of that. And just a reminder that it's illegal to post a photo of a completed voting paper on social media, including an imitation voting paper. So, key messages to re-emphasise these. Elected members seeking re-election must balance between their current roles as elected members and their potential roles as future elected members. Elected members will have access to information they need to perform their day-to-day roles, but outside of this, requests for information and the like will be made available to all candidates. Candidates will not be quoted in any media release and or be able to use any standard media slots paid for by council. Council will not promote the re-election of current elected members and not assist with electioneering activities. Social media will remain politically neutral, as I said, and candidates are free to take a position on either poll, provided no social media council resources are used. Election signs. I think I'll hand over to Nick for this slide.
So we took on board your feedback from the last time that we experienced the election signs. We're making a few changes. So I guess one of them at the front end is to highlight what the purpose of the signs are and what our intention in managing that is about. And so I guess the key thing is we want to ensure that you're visible to the community, there's fair placement of signs, and there's equitable exposure of everyone's signs. So the only time we receive complaints is when someone's done something that jeopardises those sort of founding principles, if you like, and we have to respond to those complaints, which is how we get into trouble at times. And so what we're going to try and do is really make it clear about the best way to put those signs up, to talk to us if you've got any doubts, and then we can help to make sure that it runs much more smoothly. So the goal is equity for all candidates to be seen, that you've got, we'll also bed in giving you time to fix if we receive a complaint. So there was tension around that, I think, in the last round. So this time we're going to give you time and confirm that time so that we can go back to the complainant and be clear about when they can expect to see a change. So it's sort of that expectation management, and that we will treat you consistently and we will be careful around if a sign needs to be removed. So part of the issue last time was the truck wasn't big enough. It damaged the sign when it went in. It was not intentional, but obviously it created some angst. So we've learnt quite a bit, and we will not charge you for getting that sign out for the first time. But if it happens 2 or 3 times, then the cost to recover will become yours to bear. So I will be coming to the candidacy meeting on Saturday. We will be reinforcing that, and we'll be showing some pictures around what constitutes a good sign placement, what constitutes a not good sign placement, in the hope that we can do that better. I'm going to disclose right here and now we've had an oopsie on one of the sites. So on Papakofi Road, you may have seen that one of the bylaw sites has been planted. So we've got our parking team who have very diligently planted lots of plants right up to the footpath across the identified site in the bylaw, which we're currently working through. So our plan at the moment is to either allocate another location across the road in the same place, or consider whether we can put the signs over the plants for this year and then change. So I'm just going to out that it was a miscommunication between the parks team understanding the bylaw.
I was going to say, we don't want to damage the plants,
Right.
because the people that put the signs up are quite often, they're just putting the signs up. They're not people who want to worry about the plant.
That's good feedback. So the plan A is hopefully another site on the other side of the road. We're just getting the underground services identified to make sure that we don't go into underground services. So I'm just going to out that now.
Can I ask you a couple of questions
Yes,
out
of
of
course
that?
you can.
Because I see you've increased it from 50 metres from a main road to 100 metres, or from a corner. no problem with that. What about in people's windows on houses when they are in the house and it's still closer to the 100 metres? Because we've been through this before.
Yeah,
and
right.
and not with me, but it's like,
Can I
people-
follow that up
yeah.
with the team? Because I'm not 100% sure, but let me just follow that up and we'll come back to it. And I'll clarify that on the Saturday as well when we do the run through.
you won't see me on Saturday.
Oh, no,
No,
true.
Jeff.
Just on a related note to that question, I'm just trying to understand the current law is 50 metres. So are we setting a separate requirement from the current law that we?
I think the handbook says 100, doesn't it? I thought it was 50, but I thought the handbook said 100. I could be wrong.
Oh, we might. Let me follow that
double
one up
check
too.
it.
Let me follow it up.
My only feedback on that is just, you know, if we have a bylaw, let's follow the bylaw,
Yes,
so,
yeah.
so we can be consistent with everybody.
Yeah.
Again.
Check the handbook.
Point 3.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would be news to me if we're not. So let me just check though the details. Okay, that's all from
Kathleen?
Yeah, just a question around, has there been a change as well around waratahs being used? Because last time they were allowed to be used and on the website it says.
Yeah. So all the details, those kind of details are in Hemi's mind and Marina's mind. So can I come back on Waratah and...
Waratahs,
Yeah.
I think the problem around the waratahs is people weren't putting caps on them, which
Right.
made them dangerous.
Okay.
So unless you've got a cap, because that's the health and safety bylaw, you have to have a cap on top of a waratah. I only know that from, because I do health and safety. Yes. Sorry, Kylie.
Sorry, and just to confirm, the spot in Plymouton is no longer available, is that correct?
Yes.
Yes.
That's correct.
Jeff.
And likewise, the location near the Cannons Creek School is also no longer available.
Correct.
Correct.
Yep, I think there's 15 sites by memory.
Yes.
They've reduced it down, which is good.
Yes, we've tried to get equal number of sites in both wards and hopefully the placements you're okay with.
Less litter.
Yeah.
Excellent. And additionally, some sites have been removed that were too small for all candidates to go on at
Yeah,
the same
that's
time.
good. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. So a bit more of the rules about election signs. They can go up from Saturday 9 August at midnight, i.e. 12:01 a.m. And they have to be down by 11:59 p.m. on Friday the 10th of October. Electoral donations. So donations of over $1,500 must be declared. And donations include donations of goods or services with a reasonable market value of over $300. The candidate handbook goes into a lot more detail on this, and if you've got any questions, please do let us know. Election expense limits begin today, and if you're running for say, the mayor and a councillor, the higher expense limit applies, and they are listed there. As I said, the period for campaign expenditure begins today, and you must submit a return by approximately the 11th of December. It just depends on when final results are declared, either the Wednesday or the Thursday after the election. So please do keep records and receipts of all of your expenses and donations and the like.
Jeff.
When you say the official results, if there's a judicial challenge, does that also hold up that that deadline as well, or is that obiter?
I will check that, and I'll get back to you on that.
And those expenses start tomorrow.
Yes.
The 11th, not today.
Oh, yep, apologies. Yep,
it's
it
all
is
right.
tomorrow, Friday. Excellent. So election offences, just a summary of these: imitation voting paper, bribery, treating, which is a fancy word for giving someone something. Like you can't give pens, notepads, fridge magnets, items of value, things like that. Light refreshments after a candidate meeting is generally okay, but there's a line there as well. Undue influence, unauthorised advertisements, illegal nominations, etc. And this is one of the things where we have no discretion, and any complaints are passed to the police, and they must be passed to the police. Here's an example of a sign. So this is imitation voting paper. Please don't do what is on the right. The left is fine, and you'll also see that the authorization statement on the left-hand sign is similar to what you can do now. Email address, phone number, residential address, PO box, website address, etc. We will have a heap of orange bins across our city. There are going to be 31 in total. And additionally, people can put their vote into any New Zealand Post boxes.
Kylie.
Can you authorise your own stuff?
Yep.
Oh, yeah, sweet.
Excellent. Electoral
Jeff,
rolls.
sorry.
Yep.
When is the location of all the booths going to be, the bins going to be disclosed?
Shortly. We're just locking down the last couple of locations, but they will be available shortly.
And in terms of individuals who do not get their name on the marked roll, on the electoral roll, they can still cast a special ballot. How is that process for those individuals? Do they walk to the council building and complete the enrolment forms and then vote at that point in time?
For example, people on the unpublished roll.
Yes, well, it may be not necessarily the unpublished roll, but anyone who comes in, they've been in the city for more than, or in their house for more than 30 days, they haven't updated their enrolment details. They update their enrolment details, and then they would need to cast a special ballot. Now, where would they do that?
Yep. So they can come into the council front counter during the voting period, or we'll also have voting sessions at the Cannons Creek and Porirua libraries. And we're exploring potentially having other voting sessions out in the community.
Excellent.
Right now. They can enrol and vote at the same time, and you can enrol up until Friday the 10th of October. Can't enrol on election day, but you can enrol on the Friday.
Yep.
We'll also have special voting at the Pacific Night Market on Friday the 10th of October as well.
Any of those locations, in terms of those enrolment and vote special locations that you're thinking about, will they be open on weekends?
We haven't planned any weekend openings at this stage, but it's something that we are looking at.
Okay.
But you're doing a late night on a Friday.
Night
market,
at the night
so,
market,
yeah.
Yep.
Kylie?
Can I just confirm that these ballots will also be at our 4 main marae across Porirua?
Yes, they will be. Cool. So electoral rolls, the preliminary roll is available for inspection downstairs at our front counter and also at all of our libraries right now. We cannot provide this electronically to candidates. The final electoral roll will be available shortly after the 1st of August when the roll closes. And this can be purchased in hard copy or hard copy. You can get the electronic data from the Electoral Commission for approximately $430, I believe. Additionally, we'll be doing daily voting lists throughout the voting period. Candidates can request a list of those who have sent in their ballots every day.
Jeff?
As the last point, will that information be provided in hard copy or electronic format?
I believe it will be provided electronically by the electoral officer.
Okay.
Kathleen?
Sorry, can you just so you said so that $100 one that will be after 1 August, that will be in electronic form.
No. You can purchase hard copies from us, and then the Electoral Commission will be able to provide an electronic Excel spreadsheet format of that.
For $450.
Yeah.
Thank you.
As we already mentioned, special voting will be available downstairs at our front counter throughout the whole voting period, plus also community voting sessions. And we'll also have a drive-through voting drop-off on election day to make it a bit easier for people. And then we'll also be open on Sunday, the 11th of October. In the first couple of weeks, we can post out special votes to electors. But as we get on in the period, obviously the postal system, a bit iffy on that.
Yeah.
So, election results. Progress results are available about 2 p.m. on election day. These results are with an asterisk of they are possible to change, as they don't include the final day votes and any special votes. Preliminary results are going to be available on Sunday the 12th of October. These include all ordinary votes that have been flown down to Christchurch, but no special votes. And then the final results are expected on Thursday, the 16th of October, which includes all votes, including specials. Coming into office. So, as current elected members, you leave office the day after the final results are declared, which is expected to be Friday, the 17th of October, and then the next council will come into office at that stage. you cannot act as mayor-elect or councillor-elect until you have taken your declarations at a council meeting, which is expected to be on the 30th of October, the last Thursday of October. And successful candidates on election day will be contacted by the chief executive and ELT members. And finally, nominations closed 12 noon, Friday the 1st of August, not 12:01. There is no online voting. We're going to have 31 orange bins across the city. Please get your nominations in early. Campaigning, stick to your own promotions. Be aware of your own safety as well. Report any incidents to the police directly. Election results are going to be on our website, and we'll also email you and call you as well. And election day is 12 noon, not 12:01, on Saturday the 11th of October 2025. Cheers.
Thank you, Jack. No final questions? Oh, yes, Jeff.
When you say 12:01, sorry to do this, with regards to nominations, for instance,
Yep.
let's say that the individual has put in the paperwork, but there is a question that you have, or the returning officer has, with regards to the details in that form. Will it still be considered a valid nomination, or must it be completed and considered valid at that point?
Things like the nominators must be valid at noon on the final day.
Right.
There is a small window for things like the profile statement to be confirmed if there's like minor errors in it, or
Don't risk the final day.
151
Don't
Don't
risk
risk
the
it.
final day.
Don't
We
risk
had
it.
one do that, and they only just got in.
Yep.
You know, as in they had to go on the street and find someone. So just be careful. Let's not do it on the final day, people. Anyone out there? Jack's life wants to be easy. Okay, thank you, Jack. Next up, we're going to go to depreciation, I think, meeting, aren't we? Yep. Next up, boys. Graham and Ian, are we taking questions going through, or what are we doing? Yep.
Okay.
Online briefing, we are live, yes.
Depreciation is in the cup of tea, but a fair amount of
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, that's better. Yeah.
Sorry. Just to recap, depreciation isn't everyone's cup of tea. But we'll start with a 101 and go through what depreciation actually is really quickly, because I think it is hopefully something that we're all familiar with. But then we'll go into specifics around local government and how we do things here, particularly around the depreciation reserve account, which can be a complicated space. Graham is our technician in this space. There is nothing that Graham doesn't know about the depreciation reserve account. So if we get questions, I may well shift to my right, my focus. But let's get stuck straight into it. We'll keep this, hopefully aim for 20 minutes. Questions at the end, or as we go, either or, that's fine. So first slide. Really is just the textbook example of what depreciation is. It's the 101, right? You have a car, you buy it for $50,000. In this example, at the end of 5 years, it's worth zero, okay? So you're going to thrash this car in 5 years. Basically, a straight line depreciation method would say, well, you're going to recognise a loss in value of that car over the 5 years. And the depreciation amount is the $10,000 step change down in value. So that's depreciation expense. That's a classic example you'll find in most textbooks. Where it's got really interesting for us in councils, and in fact most organisations in New Zealand that have large infrastructure, is around revaluations. When we have a revaluation, and I think I mentioned in my last session with you about the Three Waters revaluation, we had a 40% increase in value. that has a significant impact on depreciation amounts after the revaluation. So in this example, this theoretical asset, but I've kept it at the same, value as the car example. So $50,000, it kind of lost the $10,000 value in the first year, and then all of a sudden we do a revaluation and it's jumped up by 40%. And somebody who's the value has decided, well, let's extend the value, the useful life by a year. These are all kind of real things that do happen. Then that does impact on the value of the depreciation. So in the first year it was $10,000, but the next year that depreciation is applied, it's $17,500. And so you can imagine as assets are revalued over the years, that depreciation number just keeps climbing. And what we've seen, I went back through all of the annual reports that are listed on the council's website, and I pulled out the depreciation charges on each annual report going back to 2000, 2001. And what you can see here is just how much that depreciation figure has actually increased. And, particularly note the last 2-3 years where it's really, taken off. I'll throw some stats at you. And by the way, that 24-25 figure is a forecast, so we will confirm that, within the next few weeks, but that's a pretty good estimate. The depreciation is now 600% more than what it was in 2001. Now, you might say, but that's just the value of money, CPI, inflation, all that kind of stuff. Well, I had a look at CPI. Over the last 25 years, CPI has been tracking at about 100 to 110%. So it's not just inflation is what I'm saying here. This really is a reflection of what's happening with infrastructure in New Zealand and the cost of infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's a really interesting graph. This one here just gives you a little bit of background about where depreciation is being charged across our council. So, 43% of our what is that number? It's 43 million. So depreciation in this year is $43 million. So it's a big number. 43% of that, and that 43 is a coincidence. It's not. The 43% of that is Three Waters. So that's a big driver of our depreciation charge. Other big players there: transport 26%, parks and reserves 13%, and I've got other as all of the other assorted things: property, landfill, community facilities, etc. So there's a lot of stuff in that other category, which I can provide the breakdown if you want it, but that's probably going too deep. So look, just to summarise this first section of this presentation, I've been talking about depreciation expense, right? So that's an accounting function. It's maths, really. It's not cash. So, depreciation expense is not cash. It's just maths. It's calculated within a fixed asset register. It's driven by the remaining useful life, the book value, and so on and so on. So it really is... It just keeps accountants happy, auditors happy, all of those types of things. However, where the interesting conversations that you'll be interested in is when we start talking about depreciation funding or rating for depreciation. Because depreciation expense is this maths thing, but depreciation funding is where we start talking about cash and the impact on ratepayers and so on. And that's where you quite rightly should get really, really interested. And so it's really important that I did start with a depreciation expense definition and how that kind of all fits together. I did want to say a couple of things. So actually, where shall I say? Yeah, let's go back here. Before we move on to depreciation funding, I just wanted to say depreciation was, this year is the first year where depreciation is the 24, 25, and it's still to be confirmed by the actual numbers. But this year is the first year where depreciation is likely to exceed or be very, very close to the value of personnel. So depreciation personnel are really, really close, and it's a run to the finish line, really, who's going to be greater. That hasn't always been the case. Depreciation, actually I've got my notes around the wrong way. Personnel was 70% greater than depreciation way back in 2001. Depreciation personnel was 34% greater in only a few years ago, 1920. And now it's basically 1-to-1. So it's really quite, depreciation has grown much greater than personnel costs. So, it's just interesting. So where are we? Let's continue to the slide here. Now we're talking about depreciation funding. Depreciation expense is interpreted by the financial strategy which drives the amount that we charge to, fund depreciation, and that becomes our rate setting in the course of a year. Now, you may remember or recall this table. It's in our LTP, and we had as a policy that we would rate fund depreciation 84%, climbing to 85, climbing to 86, increasing at 1% every year. That was in the LTP. That was all activities except for roading. Roading was at 75%, and a straight 75%, recognising the fact that actually we receive some subsidy there, so we don't need to fully rate fund something that we're getting a subsidy for. So there was, that was our policy. We made some assumptions around the annual plan where we kept the 84 at 84 for year 2 and so on, and we also made that assumption around the revaluation that we wouldn't increase depreciation funding associated with that because now I've done some homework, so I've gone out and looked at other LTPs around our region. I can confirm Wellington City Council, Hutt City Council and Upper Hutt City Council, no one's at 100%. So it's difficult to tell from the LTPs exactly where the other councils are at, but we're very clear. So we've been very deliberately transparent, so I think that's a good thing. Upper Hutt have been quite transparent as well, but this is being recorded. I can't tell some of the other councils. Now, I've also have contacts in central government, so I thought, I wonder what central government do. When I was in central government, it was 1-for-1. So Treasury would fund depreciation 100%. So I reached out to a contact of mine who works in an unnamed ministry, and so that arrangement, 1-to-1, stopped in 21-22. And in 24-25, that ministry, unnamed, is now only funded 71% of their depreciation, and that's central government. I mention these things just to say that we're not alone. We are struggling with funding depreciation, as I think every other organisation that has a significant infrastructure, central government, local government, I think every organisation is struggling in this very matter and very detail. So we're not alone here, and that I think is reflected. The driver for the difficulty is revaluation and the cost of capex. Just the cost of infrastructure is just going wild. So I just wanted to put that out there. We're not alone in struggling with this. We've got a couple of principles that I think we need to just kind of review. So, or not review, but just put on the table. So, rates funded depreciation is intended to provide a pool of funds for the future renewal or replacement of those assets. In other words, if you think about it, if we're investing the same amount of money your suite of assets is depreciating, if you're depreciating it by this much and then investing the same amount back up here, then it means that the value of your investment portfolio or your infrastructure assets or whatever it is, it stays flat. You're not degrading it over time, but you're also not getting ahead. By investing your depreciation, your renewals, it's staying consistently of the same quality, if you like, or theoretically the same quality. So that's a kind of a principle that most infrastructural owning companies, government entities will be trying to do. Invest at the same level, their renewals at the same level as depreciation. Principle number 2, by funding depreciation through rates, current ratepayers, so this is this intergenerational equity issue, it's spreading out the value or the need for investment across the generations to ensure that there's a fair distribution of those costs. So that's another, essentially a principle that we have adopted, and most, local government, central government understand this principle. This is the way of kind of facilitating intergenerational equity across the years. We monitor this in something called a depreciation reserve account. So this is, we were talking about this morning, this really is a tracking mechanism. And so this is the way that we track the in and the out. The in being the amount of depreciation rate funding in a year, and the out being the amount that we're spending on renewals. Now it is complicated by the fact that we also use an internal loan book. So some of those CapEx, then this is all CapEx investment. Some of that comes in and out of that depreciation reserve account as well, all expertly tracked by Graham and reported every year through the annual report, auditors and so on. So, we can justify all of the ins and the outs in that account. But the interesting thing about...
Move on, sorry.
Yes.
Kathleen's got a question.
Oh, sorry.
It was the one before, sorry.
Oh,
Well, I can actually talk to both of
Yeah.
those. So with the renewals, we're in the annual plan, and would we see how much we are planning to spend on renewals? Where would we find that in the annual plan?
I'll let Graham answer that.
In summary, it's in the reserve note, which we put at the back of the annual plan. So there's a note which shows that. That's the summary for the council. I do have the detail of that in terms of all the detail.
Okay, because I wondered whether it was the prospective funding impact statement, which shows the line about the different CapEx and when you're going to replace assets for, so that would, to me, would say would be renewal. So I wondered if it was there, but it sounds like you're talking about the report where CapEx is funded by, and then there's that little table where it says depreciation this much and debt, and so where will we
it's
find
there
that?
as well as in the reserve. The thing is what Ian's
Sorry,
just...
which reserve? Depreciation reserve?
Yeah, there's a note which discloses in terms of our reserves.
Yeah, but I'm asking about renewals, how much we've actually spent on renewals, pipes, actual renewals.
Correct,
Yeah.
that's there. And then there's the other element which Ian has mentioned, which is the repayment of the internal loans.
Yeah,
That comes through as well.
so just talking on renewals for now, not the reserve at all necessarily.
Well, that's in that CapEx spend, because in that CapEx spend note, in
Yeah.
the annual report or the annual plan, I've got a table which shows you how the CapEx is funded, and there's a certain amount which is funded from the depreciation reserve. That shows that amount, and then on top of that, going out of the reserve, is the repayment of the internal loans, and then there's the interest component because we have to equalise the
So
interest payment.
you're still talking about the CapEx funded by, right? Not because
Sorry?
the reserve is the ledger, which shows the money that's going in, which is the rate funded depreciation funding. But what I'm asking is renewals. Like, so if someone says, okay, how much did PCC spend on actual renewals, how much pipe work was done.
Yeah.
In the annual plan, in the annual report, we could find that under the funding impact statement, but you're saying we could also find that under the CapEx funded summary.
That's in the annual plan, correct.
So the CapEx funded is only in the annual plan, not in the annual report?
The thing with the reserve is not all renewals are taken from that reserve. In terms of the landfill, there's a separate landfill reserve which funds all CapEx for the landfill. So that includes renewals and also any new cell developments we do. So, and then the other exception is renewals for the wastewater treatment plant. The renewals for the wastewater treatment plant, because it's a JV arrangement with Wellington City, all is loan funded. So it doesn't matter whether it's something new for the treatment plant or a renewal replacement part of the treatment plant. It's all loan funded because we have to split the cost of that arrangement or those assets with both between ourselves and with Wellington City. So they're all loan funded. So the only renewals which are funded out of the depreciation reserve is basically everything else other than the landfill and the wastewater treatment plant. So
I understand what you're saying. What I'm trying to say is if we can easily find in the plan or the report, the annual report,
Yep.
how much council is actually spent on actual renewals, and then we can look at the reserve and we see how much has gone in, how much has gone out.
Correct.
And we can work out, okay, so some was spent on renewals, and then obviously some was probably on this internal borrowing, right? And
that's correct.
okay, and so what I was really just trying to get the answer for was where to find the actual number for the renewals. But I've heard you now. It's so because that number's actually bigger in the capital funded summary. It was, I think, in the annual report it was like 55 million. So to me, I thought that meant okay, that included the internal borrowing for which needs to be paid back, right? That's from the departments if they're not. So if the department and council is not isn't getting a renewal and they're doing another project, my understanding is then they need to pay that money back. And it sounded like with interest as well. Is that correct?
That is correct. I mean, yeah, there's two things is that if you added up all the renewals which are in each of the activity statements, that would be more than what comes out of the reserve because of we're not funding out of the reserve the landfill renewals and or the wastewater treatment renewals. And then within the reserve, we're also charging to it the repayment of the internal loans and there's interest. So there's sort of two numbers, but you can't sort of get them to balance. But we do track it all.
So with the internal borrowing, is that captured or recorded in the annual report under that internal borrowing table? Or where is it captured?
Yes, that's captured in there.
Okay, so I wondered where in the reserve ledger then it is recorded, because it seemed like when I looked at the ledger for the reserves, for the depreciation, that it came in, it only showed the money, the transfers in was for the rates funded depreciation. That was the transfer in.
Correct.
So then I wondered, well, where's the ones that have been repaid from the departments? Because in the last annual report, there was 13 million that was repaid by departments, by council departments. It would have been really helpful actually if you had examples with the annual report that we had, then we could look at those specific tables and examples.
Yeah,
Is that something we send offline in terms of the?
I think online would be.
Well, sorry to hear. Well,
He can't do it now, is what
can't do
he's
it now.
saying.
Haven't
Yeah,
got
sorry, yeah, yeah. In terms of the details, because I've got the details. Because if you talk about for the 23-24 year,
Yeah.
there was 23.8 million was put into the reserve. from depreciation, and the transfers out there was 38.1 million for the capex funded, and internal loans of 5.5, and then the 38.1 and the 5.5 is the 43.6 million is coming out of the reserve, which is as per the annual report.
Yeah, so 43 million went out,
Correct.
and you're saying that the capex spend, which that includes renewals and internal borrowing, is that what you're saying? So you're not doing a separate line for the borrowing, you're putting it all in together?
Well, in the annual report, this is on page 113.
Yep.
It
Sorry,
shows.
can you show me that?
Have you got a copy on you, Kathleen, of your annual
I've
report?
got some.
43 million
Oh,
there.
yeah, I've seen that.
So that 43 million there
Yeah.
is made up of 38.1 million for renewals,
For renewals.
correct,
Okay.
capex renewals,
Yeah.
and then internal loan repayments of 5.5 million.
So can you just explain to me if the internal loan has been repaid?
Well, it's a portion of the internal loan because the internal loan could be for 20 years.
Yep, a proportion, but if
Yep.
it's been, so was that, I don't know, just say the library or the pools or whatever borrowed money from the reserve internally instead of getting a debt from the bank, right? So if they've done that, then they would have to pay a portion of that back every year. Where would that be in their budget?
That's when we do the budgets. That's in their budgets. Basically,
That's in their budgets.
Yeah, if we look at it, things as if you look at the depreciation or the funding of capex, right?
Yeah.
So the basic principle of funding of capex is if it's growth or a level of service, it will be loan funded.
Yes.
If it's renewal, it'll be funded from the depreciation reserve. Now the thing is that so then what happens is the asset, once it's capitalised, will start to be depreciated and we'll start to rate fund for that. That rate funding will get put into the depreciation reserve. For the first period of time, if it's a new asset, and it's not an existing asset, it's a new asset, it'll be funded out of the depreciation reserve for the repayment of the principal payment component of the loan, and basically we make sure that the term of the loan is less than the life of the asset. So basically, if it's a 100-year asset, for the first 20 years, the depreciation reserve will fund the principal payment for the loan, and for the last 60 years, it'll build up the reserve to enable the asset to be replaced.
Okay. So is what you're saying, say there needs a new boiler system or whatever at the pool, for example.
Yep.
And a loan is taken out because it's an improvement, so it's not a renewal.
Yep.
Are you saying that when that loan starts to need to be repaid, that you are taking the money to start to repay that loan from the depreciation reserve? Is that what you're saying?
Correct.
Okay, so that 5 million that you're talking about, for this example, for the annual report, you're saying that 5 million is a combination of all the departments that are starting to, that are repaying their debt.
Correct.
Right, okay. So what happens then for, so that's in the internal borrowings table, do you know which one I'm sort of talking
Yeah.
about? Yep, and it's got how much was borrowed in the internal borrowing. I can't remember which, I could probably tell you what page it's on.
It's note 33.
Yes, page 123. That's right.
Correct.
So where it's got new borrowings of 52 million,
Yep.
and then it's got repayment, principal and interest paid, it's got 13 million, but it's in brackets. So where does that fit into the reserve?
Well, the repayments for the principal component, so that's the 13 less the 7, because that repayment number of 13 million includes the interest of 7.5 million. difference is that the amount which would have come out of the depreciation reserve being the principal payment.
Okay. Just one more question around the interest. So in the reserve ledger, it's got $1.5 million interest that's been, or it's in deficit, so it's being charged.
Correct.
Yep.
And that is money, that is interest being charged by council. Is that correct?
It's just internal interest. So we basically, because we've got a
Graham,
fund.
Graham, is your mic on? Because the online, you keep moving away from it, so they're struggling.
Sorry. Yes, sorry. Sorry, the interest allocated is just a reallocation of the interest based on the balance of the reserves. So we look at what the interest rate was for that year for what council received on its earnings, investments and things like that, and then we just allocate the reserve, that money across the reserve based on its balances using that. So it's an internal allocation of the interest which council has received.
Okay, so it's who's paying, so no one's actually paying that interest?
Well, it's just within council itself. It's because it has to be fair, because these are reserves, especially when you look at the joint venture reserve, which is for the landfill. That's important that gets the interest on its receipts, because that money is going to be used in the future for the capital works for the landfill. So it needs to earn.
Well, that one makes
Yeah,
sense.
yeah. Well, so that's what I'm saying. It's an internal rearrangement of the interest which council has received.
So if I was in one of the council departments and I needed to borrow for CapEx, but I'm not borrowing a big amount, so I'm not going to get actual. What I'm trying to figure out too is if I'm not going to get debt itself, as in an external bank, could I then use the reserve?
Could I perhaps jump in here? So we don't borrow specifically for a project. So we don't, go to LGFA for a specific, we've got to fund a $5 million project, so we'll borrow $5 million. Our treasury policy is really to look at borrowing across council as a whole and see our whole cash flow requirements. So we don't tag an individual borrowing at a bank or a financial institution to a project. What we do with internal loans, however, though, is it's an internal mechanism to actually say, well, this particular $5 million project required $5 million of funds, so we have our own internal kind of booking system, and that internal booking system, obviously looks at principal repayments as well as interest payments. But it's very much an exercise to get cost into the right activity for funding impact statements and things like that. So we've got to recognise the cost of the interest, but it's all internally a kind of like a reshuffling of the interest across all of the various activities to kind of make the cost fit in the right buckets. So at the end of the day, all of the internal loans, all of the internal interest, they actually all net out to zero. So when we do our annual report, our annual plan, long-term plan, etc., whilst we have them, we have to calculate it because it's important for the funding impact statement. The bottom line, the council's bottom line, is not affected in any way by the internal loans or the internal interest or principal repayments. It's largely a methodology to get the costs to lie in the right place. So it's awkward because there's this layer of stuff that we do just because we're a local government. Do you know what I mean? Like no other organisation. Well, no, I shouldn't say that. I'm probably sure there are some organisations that do it, but for us, it's all about driving those funding impact statements and getting the costs right. Yep. Does that help? Or...
So what you're saying is that actually, I'll come back. That's fine. Leave it for now. Keep going.
Sorry, it's a really complicated space.
Yeah, because it's a bit of a mix of both external and internal.
Yeah.
And the internal is just, as Ian said, is so that we can do the fund and impact statements, which we have to complete as part of being local government.
Through the chair.
Yes, certainly, because I don't think you've got buckets of money hiding somewhere that we should be putting on rates.
We'll let Ian finish the presentation, but we had a good discussion before about this, and I mean, yeah, outside of council, most companies don't run those sort of reserves, but where it becomes important is when we start looking at internal loan books and so forth, is when we transfer the water assets across into the new entity. So we've been able to track through our internal loan books what our debt is. Now, Wellington doesn't do it like that, right? And that's where we got that sort of difference of views. Yeah. So it's very transparent what's been allocated to the water entity or what will go into the water entity, which makes our calculations a lot easier.
Yeah.
Okay.
We appreciate our team. So I'll let you go, Graham.
Okay, thank you. So we've talked about this, what goes in. So that's from the rate funding from the depreciation, interest applied to reserve is credit or debit balance, and then the outs are the two things. One is the renewals, which are tagged to that reserve, and as I mentioned before, the landfill and the wastewater treatment plant renewals aren't. And then there's the internal loan principal repayment, and you've got to remember that this is looking at from the life of the asset. So if it's a new asset, as I mentioned before, it's going to last, say, 80 to 100 years. For the first 20 years, the depreciation will be used to fund the loan repayment. The next 60 will be then used to renew it. So, okay.
Yeah. Now, the problem here is...
That's the theory.
Yep, that's the theory. The problem here is that our balance is actually $36 million overdrawn at the end of 23-24 year, which means that historically, you could say, well, dating back to 2016, when this reserve account was set up, we have spent more on renewals, so more money's going out than coming in. So we haven't been rate funding the depreciation through this mechanism to the same extent as we've been spending out.
Yeah.
So that's an overdrawn balance. And actually, Graham, I think you've calculated a $46 million balance forecast at the end of this.
Sorry, 60 million.
60 million. Okay,
Sorry.
it keeps getting worse.
I know.
Yeah.
If we just,
Yep.
Okay.
All right.
So this is a bit of going back to the beginning. So this is when we first set the reserve up back in 15-16 for that LTP. The green line is the money going in. The red line is the money going out, which is renewals, which is tagged to the reserve, plus the repayment of the internal loans. It was going to go negative. It was always going to go negative because we didn't put money in at the beginning. But by 22-23, it was going to go positive based on what we knew for the LTP back in 15. Nothing's changed in terms of the way we deal with the money going in and out and recording of it. It's all been consistent over time. So that was when it was established, and we thought that was okay. Next one. Now, I've skipped over the 18 LTP. I'll come back to that again. This is now the 21 LTP, 6 years later. The green line is the money going in. The red line is the money coming out. And the black line is the balance. It was now not going to balance until about 2050. And that was because of the cost of the renewals was going up considerably. So it wasn't now going to get into a positive balance for almost 30 years.
Jeff's got a question.
And while I'm not asking you to give me specific estimations at this point, with the likely expectations of the likely transfer of assets to the new water entity, and obviously also that portion of the depreciation reserve, how quickly, or not quickly perhaps, does that line go back into positive? Because at the moment it's sitting there, 2050?
Could I answer that a bit later on?
Okay. All good.
Thank you.
I have other questions, but I'll leave those to the end.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was when we... So That was
That
the,
one? Oh, which
yeah,
one do
yeah,
you want?
21 LTP. This is a bit of a busy slide, sorry, but I was trying to show you what the renewals have done as we've done the different LTPs over that period up to 34. So you'll see the green line was when we established this back up in 15, the LTP. This is only the renewals which are coming out of reserve. So this does not include the capital repayments for the loans and or any interest. This is just the renewals component of what comes out. So the green line is what we expected the renewals to be back in 15, 16. The brown line, which has come across them there, is the next LTP, which is a 2018 LTP to 38. That trended similar to the first LTP back in 15. It picks up a bit at the end by 34, but it's basically still in that same sort of zone. The next LTP we did, which on this earlier slide, was the 21 LTP, which is now the blue line. And you see it steps up, almost doubles. So the cost of the renewals, capital renewals coming out of the reserve is basically doubled. The black line is the tracking of the actuals and also the estimate for this year and the annual plan number. And you can see it spiked from 22. And that was the actuals. And then what was done this year, and then also for next year's or this year as in the annual plan up to the 40 million. The red line is what we've got in the LTP 24-34. And you can see that the actuals were for that last year of 24-25 are up on the red line, and then the red line just keeps going up and up. So basically from where we were from the initial LTP back in 15, the cost of renewals has tripled. Is there any questions? So just trying to show you how it's sort of changed over time. And it's been quite a spike since that 21-22 year. The next one, this is quite another difficult slide, but I'll walk through it. This is important now for when we're talking about, as Jeff just mentioned, around the transfer to the assets to the new water entity. So the biggest issue has been drinking water, which is the brown line, which from 22 has taken a big negative, which has brought the whole reserve down. So we're projecting for the end of what I've got in the annual plan for this year, the end of 26, that the reserve will have a $60 million negative balance. That's mainly driven by what we've having to spend on renewals for drinking water. The purple line is the rest of council. So the biggest portion of that, I should say, is transport, and that comes to be about, by 26, about negative 15 million. The wastewater is not too bad. That's the blue line. That ends up being about just under 10 million negative. And the positive in this is the stormwater, because we're not having to spend so much on that in terms of what we're funding for its renewals, is actually a positive balance. So the net sum, what we've estimated by the end of 26, which is on the next slide, is that the waters will have approximately be negative by 44 million, and the rest of council will be negative about 15 million, making up that 60 million negative balance by the end of this year. And that's important because when we've, as Jim mentioned before, is when we've been working with about the debt transfer, we're talking about both the internal loans and also the portion within the depreciation reserve, which is related to the waters. And this has been important, is why we have to record this and why I've been breaking it all out by each of the activities, is that we're working on that that 44 million will be part of the debt transfer to the new water entity. So we'll get that money back. And that's why it's been important to record this and analyse it as we have been doing.
Through the chair, do you want, Ian, do you want to talk to the question on the table from Jeff? which is in regards to the 15 million, how we treat that.
Well, that's sort of the next slide.
Okay.
Because this is part of what we have to do as part of the amended LTP. So looking at this whole thing is looking at this, the financial resets and including for rates, talking about the balanced budget, what we rate for depreciation, how we rate for debt and its repayment. I mean, there was an interesting in that article yesterday, I don't know if you saw it, was from the CEO of Wellington City about their pre-election report, and they're hitting the same thing. So in all, as Ian mentioned before, all councils are hitting the same thing about debt, but we're all hitting ceilings, so you've actually got to repay the debt at some point. You can't just keep borrowing. At the moment, we're borrowing to even for our operationals, but we've got to, I'm not saying anything new, but that's the challenges for the next LTP or the amended LTP is these settings, and then around the rates levels and any limits we want to set around that. And then there's this important thing about the intergenerational equity, as we mentioned right at the beginning, between current ratepayers paying for the assets they're currently using and things like that.
Don't kick the can down the road.
This is things which we need to address. I'm not trying to say what the answer is, but this is what we have to address as part of the amended LTP.
Josh.
Cool, thank you. So just to clarify around that, so fair to say, based on what you're saying at the moment, that any attempt to reduce rates more without a related reduction in actual spending, that would be, in order to do that, we would be required to borrow even more money than we are right now just to maintain our operational expenses. I'm understanding that correctly?
Yeah.
So the only way we could possibly reduce rates anymore would be if we're actually cutting real spending.
Services, correct, yeah. And we've
Yeah.
been through, as we've talked about through the annual plan process, we've been through the efficiencies and reviews, and we'll still continue to do that.
Yeah.
But the big change, if you want to get a quantum shift, is levels of service.
Okay. And just to contextualise that, so we're currently borrowing money to pay for operational expenses. Could you speak a little bit to what the implication of that is and whether or not in usual times that would be considered good financial practice?
I think we've been this in the past in terms of where we've been consistently trying to balance the budget because it's not sustainable over the long term. And, council's made conscious decisions for this year and in the annual plan because of the water reform it's not to address some of the issues, fundamental issues around the balanced budget and things like that and funding for depreciation. But that's all right because that's for a 1 year 1 year we've got this window of opportunity with the water reform, but it has to be dealt with as part of the amended LTP for the long-term structural financial outcomes for council. And we're not, unique. And that article, which was in yesterday's paper from the CE from Wellington City, is consistent, I think, for a lot of councils across the country. We're all facing the same things.
Yeah.
Cool, thank you. And then so I guess related to that, just so we can understand the importance of this, I'm correct in recalling we haven't always rated for depreciation, have we?
No, we started in 15-16. That's
Yeah.
when we started, which was that first one of those first slides, which are shown where we established that reserve. And
Yeah.
it was meant to become positive, but as I said, over time, that's proven not to be correct because of the cost of the renewals have gone up so much.
Yeah. What are the implications of not rating for depreciation? If we failed to do that, if we failed to rate for how much things are depreciating, noting that actually we're not fully rating for depreciation right now because we're not at that 100%, what are the implications of that? What impact would that have long term?
Well, you're eventually going to run out of money because the amount of depreciation, if you look at your revenue statement, the depreciation is non-cash. So the amount of depreciation you have is effectively the amount of money you can spend on CapEx without having to borrow any money.
Yeah.
So it gives you that buffer zone. So it depends on how much of that buffer zone you want to do for borrowing for your capital program. The bigger the buffer is, over the long term, that's better because eventually you're going to run out of being able to borrow.
Yeah. You'll hit your debt ceiling.
You'll hit your debt ceiling.
And then what do?
And then you have to have a real big spike in your rates because you've got to pay for it.
Is
And
that
then,
not just kicking it so that the next councils and the future councils will be covered in debt? There'll be higher rates,
Yeah,
more
bet.
borrowings and reduced services.
correct, and that's not the intergenerational, and that comes into the intergenerational issue because the current ratepayers should pay for that. You shouldn't all load it onto the future ratepayers. So it's trying to keep that equity, and this is it's not. This is where you've got a number of things and you've got to sort of balance them together. It's not one thing, it's not the other thing. It's not like the balanced budget, it's not like depreciation. It's the combination of those and how they interplay and how you then get what's best for, for the council both today and for tomorrow.
Okay, cool. Thank you. So fair to say that the approach we're taking now, because we're not doing that 100% full rating for depreciation, we're still in that not balanced budget, that actually if we were trying to do that, which would be long-term responsible financial management, rates right now would actually have to be much higher, but we've made a conscious decision to not do that because of the impact that's having on our community. But if we were to go even further in that direction, it would be creating an even bigger problem for future councils.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
And I suppose that's what's happened in the past, is that the councils in the past haven't rated for depreciation, and we're now having to deal with that.
Mike's next.
Is this workshop going live?
Yes.
We're not doing a hell of a lot to encourage people to stand for council, are we?
Yeah, I already had you, Jeff. Jeff, then Kathleen. Yeah.
Thanks. That actually was a really important line of questioning, but and you've answered one of the questions I was alluding to before. So thanks, guys, for doing that. There is, just so I'm clear here, with regards to the valuation of assets or the determination of the depreciation was covered on a number of factors in the earlier slide, which was the value of the replacement, the life of the asset. Is this where sweating the asset comes into the conversation in terms of extending the life time of a given asset, and that consequently has an impact on the depreciation that we will rate for?
Yes, but then that sweating the asset, as they say, could come at a cost in terms of you've got to keep repairing it to keep it up, even working. So that's the converse to it. So you may save on depreciation, but it's the cost of your keeping it going, costing you more.
Yeah, the OPEX is in that as well. So the question I was trying to get to in that context was there is a limit to sweating the asset, which you've just answered for me. In terms of the introduction of the depreciation reserve in 2015, I wasn't here. But what has been the expectation for those assets that were in place before the establishment of the depreciation reserve? Is that also us having to now play catch up with the rest of those assets that were not part of that regime fully pre 2015, 2016?
No, I think it's more because of what I was showing isn't that 15, 16 is that reserve would have come positive, and that's what we believed at the time, given the information we had from the asset management plans and things like that, the renewal of all the assets which council had back in 15. But it's been that quantum change at about 21, 22 in terms of the cost of the renewals, which has just sort of spiked over the last 2 or 3 years, and it's been rapid. So that's been a fundamental impact, and I suppose we're now understanding what that is, and we're having now to deal with the consequences or the following that.
As is the rest of the multi.
Yeah.
No more questions. Thanks.
Kathleen.
Thanks. I just wanted to go back to when you were speaking about the principal and the interest repayments within the reserve, and that 5 million that you said went to that. So what do you do for, because that's not the only place where we repay debt, right? Don't we also rate for or because 5 million isn't all that we're repaying in debt, is it?
Sorry, that's the internal loan. book, though. External debt, yes, we have to repay on maturity, draw down new loans, etc. So that's a separate conversation about the external treasury processes that we have in place.
Can you help me understand by giving an example maybe of like what would be that loan, an external loan, and what would be an internal loan?
So we would externally borrow to. We're doing cash flow analysis all the time. We need to make. We need to pay the payroll this fortnight. We need to pay Wellington Water the end of the month. We need to. So we're tracking all our ins and outs through our bank account, and we're saying we know we're having to make a big payment. CapEx payment, we're going to, our cash flow requires us at some point in time to borrow more money to just, from a cash flow perspective.
So, sorry, are you talking about operations?
Operations, CapEx, anything that hits our bank account. So we're funding for, the organisation. And of course, we might have to make a $15 million repayment of a principal, of a on-term maturity of a particular loan. So all of those things, we've got in a spreadsheet for tracking, our cash requirements. So that's when we would go to LGFA and say, hey, we need to borrow 15 million on the 1st of August or whatever it is, so we've kind of got that together. It's not specifically tagged to Project XY or the payroll or any of those things in isolation, but it's looking at the whole gross, transactions that hit our bank account, forecast hit our bank account over the next 6 months or something. But the internal loan book is saying, okay, well, this the storage tank out here, it's, we need to, we know through the annual plan process or the LTP process, we know that we're going to have a $97 million project by the end of it. It's spread across 2 different years. We're going to have to fund that internally. And so, Graham has this calculation which applies our cost of capital to that and tracks the interest associated with that amount of money required for that project. And so we're internally applying interest to that project, which is tagged to the interest that we have to pay externally. But it's tagged. It's not actual. It's not actual interest. It's that's the internal loan book will be specific projects, Project X, Project Y, dotted around the council, but the external loans are our cash flow requirements.
Ian, it's probably worth adding that when we report to the Audit and Risk Committee, remember we put up a compliance schedule against our Treasury policy. That's actually tracking whether we are working within our requirements as we've set out in our financial strategy, and that really is monitoring our external debt book and our liquidity, and so that's where you see the external overall overarching sort of management of our finances from a Treasury point of view is through the Audit Risk Committee compliance report. So that gives you a view that you've got confidence that the finance team either got it under control or not. And at the moment, of course, we've been showing compliant reports.
They completely got it.
Yeah.
They have the support of the council. Thank you.
And so we have PwC, who are our advisors, and we work quite closely. We have a monthly catch up with them. And we've got our Treasury policy, obviously, and we've got a really good reporting mechanism. So, but that's all at the external borrowing kind of level, showing us who we're borrowing with, where our investments are placed, and so on and so on, our liquidity, all of these types of issues, really good reporting. So, that's pretty watertight.
So those ones, though, you're saying aren't tagged to a specific project, but that the internal borrowing, it sounds like, is all of the CapEx projects, including the water the storage tank, that 5 million,
Yep.
for, just say for the last financial year, that's everything, is it? As well as the renewals that were actually paid for?
So the internal loan book is it's kind of like if we were our own bank and we had our own little kind of portfolio of capex projects, and we're pulling down, or we're funding those internally, and we're saying this project needs $5 million, and we'll give it the cost of capital of 4.7 or whatever it is, and we'll track that. It's almost like we're being our own banker for our own projects. But that's largely paper entry, because we're dealing with the cash at the higher level. Do you know what I mean? We're paying LGFA, we're paying whoever we're borrowing funding from. That's at the higher level. That's real cash. But the internal loan book is making sure that our funding impact statements, our activities get charged properly. We're doing that in the kind of the detailed introspective view, whereas the external stuff is the external stuff. Does that help?
So can you also just confirm, like, when we actually go to pay for renewals, the projects itself, like when we go to pay Wellington Water or whoever for the pipes that have been done, right now that funding for those renewals, is that correct that it's coming from debt?
The cash is no.
It's net of all our operational cash. So that's the net. I mean, as Ian's mentioned, we just borrow for the net amount. So we get our rate revenue, we get our fee revenue, we have our expenses, and we have our capex. And as we need to borrow money because we're spending more on a combination of our operational expenditure and our capital expenditure than what revenue we get from rates and any fees we charge. So there's a gap. The gap we have to borrow.
So you're only borrowing the gap?
Externally, we're only borrowing the gap, correct.
Okay, so is because my understanding was the reserves was being used to offset the debt. Is that right?
Offset the...
And that, like, we'd get a loan, say, to pay for the cost of the pipe renewals, but then the actual reserve would be there to offset the debt.
Well, as Ian's mentioned, that's a net. That the internal loans is the internal recording of that, so that we can do the funding impact statements and the accounting for the activities, so we can show what each of the activity is costing council. But as Ian's mentioned before, is when we come to do the borrowing, we're borrowing as a council. So that's for the council total operational needs for council. And as I mentioned before, is that if the more you rate to cover your expenses and your depreciation, it gives you that buffer, so that when you're coming to actually spend money on a capital program, you've got the cash which has come in is more than the cash which is going out, because if you rate fund for depreciation, you're getting that cash on the positive side, on the inside, and that then means when you're spending money going out for capex, you've got that buffer from your rating for depreciation. And that's what it's for.
Ian, we discussed this yesterday, and just to give you an idea, for 25-26, I think this is what we worked out, Graham, that depreciation will represent approximately 28% of our total income. In other words, the funding, 28% of it is coming from depreciation that we're rate funding. And of the rates funding, which is a lower amount because you've got service fees and so forth, you've got about 47 million out of 122 million, so about 38% of the rates funding. So depreciation is a very important component of our funding stream. If we took that out, we'd be, I guess, what's the best way to say this?
I don't think we'd be
we,
taking it
we're
out.
going broke very quickly.
Broke.
Right? Yeah.
I guess what I'm trying to just establish is when we pay for a project, if we are paying for it with debt instead of cash, then that debt is costing, and renewals in principle are meant to be funded from cash. So that's what I want to get confirmation of. Are the renewals being funded from cash? It sounds like, are some of them being funded and then the gap is being done by debt, or are all of them being funded by debt and then there's a cost of debt?
I think the thing is that you've got to break out what's internal and what's external. And I suppose part of one of the complexity of this is there's a bit of a mix in terms of some of this reporting is a combination of both external and internal. The thing is, if you're looking at it from an external point of view, from a that's important in terms of what revenues or what cash are we getting in and what cash is going out. And the thing is that it gets mixed because the cash coming in is only coming from rates and it's coming from fees and charges. That's all the revenue which we receive from. And the cash going out is two lots of cash. One is operationals to pay like salaries and wages and things like that, and the other one is to do the capital program. So that's what I'm saying is you've got flows of money in and out, and they get intertwined, I suppose. And from a council perspective, we're just really worrying about is how do we manage our cash needs for council as a total council. So that doesn't look at it from an activity point of view, it looks at it from a council point of view. And we have our treasury policy, which says in terms of what we have to have in terms of liquidity and things like that. So that's the external view. The internal view is that we've got to account for the costs and incomes for each of the activities. So that's why we have to have the internal loan book, the depreciation reserve and all those other things to record the ins and the outs so that when we come to do the annual report or annual plan around the FIS statements, the financial impact statements for activity, we can show for each activity what that is income is, what's the expenses, what the capital, what needs for that was, and the funding in terms of how we were funding for the capital program. So there's the two views, and they don't necessarily always align, although over time they will, because eventually your external and your internal loan book has to be basically the same, but they may not be quite the same at any one point in time because your internal allocations and your external may be different, and we may hold more cash for liquidity purposes. There's the different movements, and that's part of where this becomes a wee bit complex and difficult.
Could I perhaps add something to your question about, I think where you're going with your question is, can I confirm that the amount that is taken from ratepayers for funding depreciation, can I guarantee that money is being spent on renewals? That's the core of the question that you're asking.
Or is it being, is debt being drawn down to pay for that 39 million or 38 million, like the entire amount, the entire amount used for debt?
I think the answer to your question is that this mechanism here, this depreciation reserve account, because it's overdrawn, because it's so overdrawn actually, not just slightly, it's massively overdrawn, that's the proof that the funding coming in for rates funding depreciation is less than the amount we've spent on renewals. And I think that's the answer to your concern that maybe we're not spending that money on renewals. We're actually spending way more on renewals than we're rate funding. And this is the very mechanism that tracks that, if you like.
Yeah. So I think what I'm trying to... So we spent 39 million on renewals. 30 million came in rates renewal funding, right? Just say in the 23-24 year. So there's 9 million gap, right? like, just say if it was quite simple and you're short 9 million, so obviously that would have had to come from somewhere, a debt. But what I'm wanting to, and so then you've only got a debt on 9 million, and not, and the expense that comes with that debt, the interest expense, because the whole point of depreciation is that intergenerational equity, right? That there's actual cash there, so that one generation isn't lumped with the debt when the asset needs to be replaced. So what I'm trying to gauge here is the renewals being spent with cash, or is the whole amount being debt funded, and then in actual fact we've got debt and debt costs?
Yeah, it's problematic to use the term cash, and I know that's because we don't tag the cash that comes in from debt or rates. We don't have, put it into separate bank accounts. Okay, we're only using this cash
We have one account.
We've only got one account, so we do all our treasury policy, if you like, is based on what's happening in that one account. So I can't say that $5 received from that person there is going to be spent on that project here. Our systems aren't that detailed. But all I've got is things like that depreciation reserve account, which says this money's coming in, that money's going out, and I'm a simple guy. It's negative. We're overdrawn.
Yeah,
Does
but
that-
It's approved by auditors and everybody else.
Oh,
So it's not
yes,
simple.
absolutely.
You've done
Yeah.
a great job on it.
Yeah.
So if you take that example for 23-24, we got in 23.8 million from depreciation from rates funding, and we spent on capital renewals coming out of the reserve 38 million. So there's 38 million being spent, only 23 million going in, so there's a 15 million shortfall
In 1 year.
in 1 year. And all other things being equal, if our operational revenue and expenditure was even, but we know it's not, we would have had to borrow that $15 million.
Okay, can I go to another quick couple, because I've got Josh next, and I know that Jeff has to go.
Cool. Thank you very much. Thank you for explaining that. I appreciate it. What I just want to clarify, because I think we're getting potentially a little bit bogged down in operational accounting practice, which I don't think is what we need to be doing. From a governance perspective, in terms of why we're taking this approach, what I just want to confirm, the approach we're taking in terms of these internal ledgers around things like interest and tagging and things like that, that is a necessary approach if we are taking a borrowing approach of borrowing for our net debt totals as opposed to tagging for specific projects. Am I understanding that correctly? So basically, if we want to just borrow all in one go, as opposed to for specific projects, this approach you're describing is necessary to facilitate that.
Correct.
Yeah.
So if we did kind of like jam jar accounting, where you had, here's a bank account for water, here's a bank account for transport, here's a bank, and so then you could actually, borrow funds specifically for transport.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So you're right. The internal loan book exists purely because we don't do that jam jar approach. We've got one bank account for the Porirua City Council. We've got to pay all of our OPEX, all of our CAPEX out of that. We've got rates being paid into that account. We've got the borrowings that we make into that one account, and the internal loan book is just the methodology we have to actually assign it to the various activities.
Yeah, perfect.
As they require money.
Cool, thank you. That makes a lot of sense. So could you give us some context around why it is beneficial for us to take that approach? So, for example, what would the implications be on council if instead of doing that, we took an approach which might be easier to intuit on a balance sheet, but potentially less effective, which would be we're not going to do that overall borrowing. Instead, every time we need to borrow money for a project, we'll go and borrow specifically for that? What would the implications of that be?
I think your treasury function would be way less efficient.
Yeah.
And so you'd probably end up having to have way more contingency in each bank account, if you like, or each area would have to, make sure that we don't run out of money. So each one has a little bit more of a buffer than you would need, and you add up all of those buffers, and it's probably way more than if you just keep things centrally.
Yeah, so fair to say it would be more expensive.
I
to do that.
think it would definitely. I mean, then there's the administration of reconciling different things, and it's that would be a step back
Cool.
In efficiency terms.
And so the reason I ask that is because I understand from the perspective of looking in and trying to understand these tables and these balance sheets and everything, that it might look very complicated. I guess what I'm trying to establish is there is a very good reason for us doing it that way.
Yes.
And that is that it is more efficient, which
Yes.
ultimately saves us money, which ultimately saves the ratepayer money.
Yes.
Yeah. And that approach that we're using, not only is it more efficient, but it is common best practice in organisations like ours, and it's approved by our auditors.
I absolutely, definitely approved by the auditors, and as far as we're aware, it's the best way that we can do what we do. And Standard & Poor's, look across our treasury function. It's the best system that we're aware of to track all of the interdependencies and goings on underneath the hood.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You want your next slide? I've got a couple of councillors running out.
Okay. Look, this was just a summary slide. So basically, in four, I wondered how to put this. It's really just one sentence, but in 4 parts. Council has been spending more on renewals than what has been depreciation rates funded, mainly in the 3 waters, especially drinking water and wastewater, and especially accelerated over the last 3 or 4 years, and leading to an overdrawn depreciation reserve. It's one sentence, but there's 4 bits to it, which I think are all equally important there. So that was the summary. I thought this would take 20 minutes, but clearly you guys are really interested in depreciation, and maybe I should sign you up for an accounting course and make you all qualified accountants. But look,
Thank you, Ian and Graham. That's awesome. There's no final questions? No? All right, thank you both very much. We will finish with our karakia. Oh, yes, sorry. Yes, science questions we've got answers. So sorry.
Just going back to operational detail, thank you to the officers for giving me the advice on the questions you asked about signs. So I can confirm that the distance is 50 metres, which is in the bylaw. It's NZTA rules that are 100 metres from intersections. So that's that one. Signs are allowed in windows as long as they don't breach the 50-metre rule from an intersection. Then they can be in a window. Or they're authorised by an officer because they're deemed not to be a distraction. And then with regards to the waratahs, metal waratahs are not allowed. It is just wooden stakes.
Okay, thank you.
Pleasure.
All right. Oh, Josh, one question there.
Sorry, just really quickly clarifying then, the 100 metre NZTA rule, that only applies for NZTA roads?
Correct.
Okay, so for all local council roads, it's the 50
50
metres under
metres,
the bylaw.
and that's consistent with the bylaw. Yep.
Cool. Okay, karakia together when we get on. Okay. Thank you. Are we off yet?